The Bureau began work on the dam in Glen Canyon. It would generate hydropower for Phoenix and revenue to pay for other dams, and would submerge 186 miles of canyon.
The big dam in the Colorado River, the one with the big capacity, would be Glen Canyon Dam, the 26 million acre-foot capacity reservoir, 186 miles long. That was the big one. That was the moneymaker. It wasn't for irrigation, it was just to make hydroelectric power.
Glen Canyon was one of the most remote spots in America, 100 miles from the nearest paved road. Here, Powell found the river smooth and deep, with Anasazi ruins on the banks. Barely 200 people had ever been through the canyon.
The first year I ran down Glen Canyon was in 1954. And as we come near Lee's Ferry, probably 15 or so miles above Lee's Ferry, there's marks on the wall. There's something going on over there. There's piles of dirt. I looked up, we did, and there, 600 or more feet above us, little dots, little guys, way up on top of the rim. We looked through the binoculars, and they were surveyors. I said, geez, those are surveyors. They're going to dam this canyon.
Glen Canyon, as it was. Glen Canyon, as it will be. At 11:30 on the morning of October 15th, 1956, President Dwight D. Eisenhower triggered a blast far smaller than the atomic explosions now nearly so commonplace.
Some of the rock scaling had already been done. I marveled at it because here was a sheer wall, canyon, a muddy river running through it. And I tried to visualize Hoover Dam already in place. That was what we were doing. We were building a duplicate of Hoover. It staggered me to think of the job yet to be done.
Reclamation chief was the legendary Floyd Dominy.
Floyd Dominy is a household word in the 17 western states, the reclamation area. Kennedy called me the nation's water boy. When Senator Jackson had prevailed on Udall to suggest that maybe it was time for me to retire, all I had to do was alert the White House that these people were twisting my tail and pinching a little, and it stopped. Lyndon took care of it.
He's sort of the role model for a lot of ways that the Bureau approached things. It was more of a damn the torpedoes, let's get this son of a bitch built. And he got a lot of it built.
Remember that hydroelectric energy is the only pollution-free energy that's created. It's renewable. You don't burn up a coal mine, or you don't mine out a mine, you don't drill out a well. You don't have 25,000-year half-life full of rods from the atomic power. I think it's a shame that we haven't developed every single possible kilowatt from this renewable, non-polluting source of energy. Everyone in the Bureau of Reclamation, including Western congressmen and senators, firmly believed that the reclamation program was a must for the growth and expansion of the West. And we had no dissenters in the 40s and 50s, early 50s at least. It was everybody gung-ho, and let's get it done. The great moment on dam construction is when you finally realize that you put the last bucket of concrete on the top of the dam, and that you now are prepared to close the tunnel and let the river start making its way up to the spillway levels and fill the lake.
When Glen Canyon Dam was nearly complete, David Brower, executive director of the Sierra Club, visited the condemned canyons for the first time. Brower and the Sierra Club had stopped a dam on the Green River in exchange for not objecting to the dam in Glen Canyon.
Glen Canyon used to be filled with beavers. There's no beaver in there anymore. Good fishing in there. It was just a nice, quiet, no rapids to speak of, and some very historic spots in there. It's just a nice place.
There must have been 125 to 30 canyons. each one of them with a stream in it.
But you walk up this little stream, then you turn left, and suddenly you're in one of the most remarkable places on earth. Huge amphitheater. It's, much bigger than most of the cathedrals I've been in. Just a little slot of sky up on top. A little bit of water coming over a waterfall at the head of this.
Up to a slot of smooth sandstone that if you touched it, it just felt like velvet. And above that, a twisting funnel where the light came down first kind of yellow, then kind of dimmer, and then kind of orange.
An exquisite place, just about as beautiful as anything the Creator ever dreamed up.
Powell had been the first outsider to see Glen Canyon and these dozens of side canyons. Brower would be one of the last.
And at Glen Canyon, this was a critical time, and I recall the decision I had to make whether we could close the gates that year or have to wait another year.
I'd seen the canyon, I'd seen the side canyons, my family had seen them, I knew what a beautiful place it was. I testified on the lack of comprehensive thinking that had gone into the entire project and came up with very strong arguments for stopping the entire project. But I wanted, at least at the last moment, to appeal to Stuart Udall, and I wanted to get in to talk to him, because that was the last day they were going to close the gates and start filling Glen Canyon. And I got to his office, but never got to see him because he had this other agenda.
Of course, all the upper basin states people and politicians were saying, close the gates, close the gates. And all the downstream people who relied on the water coming on through, don't close the gates, don't close the gates.
I did have this last desperate hope that we could stay the closing of the dam, the closing of the river valves, and stop any further filling until we'd thought a little bit harder about the alternatives. And that January of '63, I failed. So Glen Canyon started filling.
We finally got an estimate that indicated and that we would get up to power plant intake levels by the end of July. And so I made the recommendation that we close the gates and start filling.
But I was the one person who was in position to stop it before they had built the dam. And there's where my big failure was. We had the arguments, we had the votes, and for reasons that I still do not understand, I didn't do what I should have done. I just sat there, and I didn't act.
And as our plane glided down into this immense canyon landscape, I could see from afar this plug in the river, the place where Glen Canyon Dam stands. As I look around at this incredibly beautiful and creative work, it occurs to me that this is a new kind of writing on the wall. A kind that says, proudly and beautifully, man was here.
We're looking down 583 feet, or 175 meters. Goodbye, Hat.
The reservoir was christened 100 years to the day after Powell passed through Glen Canyon. Glen Canyon Dam was built to generate hydropower for homes, industry, and air conditioning in Phoenix, and to power pumps which lift the Colorado 300 miles uphill to new farms and towns in Arizona. Today, 4 million people a year visit Glen Canyon Dam and its lake.
But I felt from the very start that it should be Lake Powell, because Powell is the man who had made the canyon famous. He was the man who was really the father of the Bureau of Reclamation. He was the one who made the reports to Congress that indicated that the West could never be developed by private enterprise alone, that it would take the power and muscle of the federal government to develop and settle the West properly. So I thought Lake Powell was the proper name for that reservoir.
One of the most outrageous things that ever happened was to name the reservoir the Flatwater behind Glen Canyon Dam after John Wesley Powell, a reservoir that flooded some of the things that he thought were the most beautiful he had ever seen. And I'm sure that if he were around, he would be after the person who thought of that idea, and we'd say, you can't do that. Maybe Dominie's Flatwater or something of the sort, but not Lake Powell.
When you dam a river, you always lose something. You can't provide something for somebody else and not have somebody in the middle get upset.
Senator Goldwater had been a strong advocate for Glen Canyon Dam.
Right, it's, I guess, probably one of the most beautiful reservoirs in the world. And as you ride on it, you can see things you could not have seen in the river. But I just as soon never see them.
Well, I went into a canyon on the left bank, and I wound around, and I came across a very narrow place where I could just barely get my boat through. And I looked back down, and the sun, at that particular moment, had come down just like a beam, right smack down into the water. And what it showed me was that spiral that I had looked up at.
There are 2,000 Anasazi sites buried in the water now. But they decided the practical advantages would outweigh that. This was a controversial dam. It kicked off the environmentalist movement in the United States because a handful of people had taken the trouble to find out what an exquisite little canyon this was.
These canyons now lie 600 feet below the surface of Lake Powell.
I have to be honest with you, I'd been happier if we didn't have the lake. Glen Canyon was a beautiful piece of water.
If you had to vote today on damming Glen Canyon, would you vote?
I'd vote against it. Because I've become convinced that, while water is important, particularly those of us who live in the desert, it's not all that important.
8 million years of geologic change came to a sudden end. Environmental havoc swiftly took hold downstream. For years, the Colorado had run 85 degrees and rich with silt. Now, from the deep reservoir, it runs freezing cold and crystal clear. Most of the native fish, which had evolved over 1 million years in the warm, silty water, vanished into extinction. Lake Powell evaporates 10 feet a year, twice what the city of Los Angeles uses in a year. The violent natural floods which redistributed river sand were replaced by a regulated daily tide, governed not by the rain, but by electric power demand in Phoenix.
Would you believe a fish story in which a transport plane is loaded with 400,000 rainbow trout in order to stock a remote lake in Arizona? At a carefully chosen altitude, 650 feet, the adult trout are ready to drop into their new home. Knocked out briefly, 95% of them survive. These flying fish may be the first successful piscatorial airdrop.
I had no sympathy for those who felt that nature couldn't be improved upon. Now, I admit that nature can improve upon man. We're probably the supreme being, but in the realm of rivers, I think man can improve upon them.
We're not trying to recreate what was here before the dam. That's that's almost impossible to do. But still trying to protect the endangered species and the culture.
40 years ago, there were no studies of the environmental change Glen Canyon Dam would set in motion. National environmental laws did not exist. Now, a Bureau team studies those changes in the river system. Powell's men found the ancient river half a mile wide at its mouth, pouring into the ocean. By 1967, Hoover Dam, Glen Canyon, and 8 other dams stopped the river in a chain of giant reservoirs. Except in very wet years, the Colorado River no longer reaches the sea. The remains of the river vanish into the sand in northern Mexico.
many, many people have had lives and livelihoods. Cities have been built and huge amounts of food produced that just would never have happened without these reclamation projects. And I don't think anyone can truly logically sit down and say, in the grand scope of everything in context, that that was an evil thing to do. That's bullshit.